Well, hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Kevin Sabet. I'm the president and CEO of SAM, and joined by a great group today. We're very excited to get started here. Um, and we have over 500 registrants, so that's why we waited a few minutes, and I'm sure others will continue to come on. Obviously, a lot of interest in this area. What we kind of thought was I'm going to present some slides just to kind of set the conversation. And then, we have such an illustrious panel here, joined, of course, by our FTPS co-founder and SAM's executive vice president, Luke Niforatos, who's on. We're also joined by Stu Thau, who I think everybody knows needs no introduction. Is the public policy consultant for CADCA and has been in this field almost 4 decades now. We're just lucky to have her experience and expertise. Incredible to think about that. And also Dr. Russ Kamer, who I think most of you know and is doing incredible work with the IASIC group. He's a clinical associate professor at the New York Medical College, and was actually the drug testing crew chief for the NCAA and the doping medical officer at the '96 Olympics, which I didn't know about the Olympics side, or maybe I forgot, Russ, but pretty neat. He also co-founded Partners in Safety Occupational Medicine. And like I said, is part of the Expert Physician Council for the International Academy for the Sciences and Impact of Cannabis, IASIC, which I encourage you all to check out as well. So I'm going to be sharing some slides here. And I think what we'll do, again, I really do invite all of the panelists here to interrupt. I think we should just kind of do this in a way that isn't very formal. And so I'm going to present some slides. And if there are things I'm missing or things you want to add, just please get in there. And then for the participants here, because we have several hundred obviously on, please I think you can type your question in, I believe, on the Q&A. So please do that. We should just know as well that there are several media outlets on. This is open press. There are people with diverse opinions, diverse points of view, and probably diverse funding sources that are on this webinar right now. So just keep that in mind. But we're very happy to have everybody because we're really putting it all out there on this issue that I think is extremely comprehensive and also, I think, extremely misunderstood as well. Which I think we're going to talk about some of that right now. So let me go ahead and start schedule. Probably you can see my slides, I hope. If not, let me know. So let's talk about, I'm going to minimize the screen here. Let's talk about the schedules here. I mean, probably most people understand that the DEA has classified controlled substances into 5 categories that are distinct, depending on 2 criteria that Congress came up with in the 1970 Controlled Substances Act. By the way, just a little bit of, now that I have so many hundreds of people on here, I get to get on the soapbox a little bit, I guess. What's interesting about the 1970 Controlled Substances Act is really, if you look at it historically, it was actually seen as a drug reform, meaning a less conservative drug law than was already on the books. In the 1950s, we had mandatory minimums, federal mandatory minimums. For all drugs, including marijuana, that was a part of the Boggs Act. And what 1970 did, interestingly, was actually reform that and change the way we look at drugs. And it wasn't until the mid-'80s with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act did we get mandatory minimums back. So I think a lot of people think about the Controlled Substances Act as some kind of extra punitive measure. In fact, historically, if you look at it, it was actually a non-punitive measure. It was a reform from the previous punitive measures. But anyhow, what it did is it classified drugs into 5 distinct categories or scheduling. And what I think people is the biggest misconception, you can read what the drugs are there, but what the biggest misconception is that if 2 drugs are in the same schedule, then we think about them as equally harmful. And that's actually not at all what the scheduling is. The scheduling just simply means that if you fall under these 2 categories of acceptable or accepted medical use, and depending on your abuse or dependency potential, sort of a range there. And if you fall into that, you're in that schedule. So I use kind of maybe a stupid analogy when I talk about this, but I talk about like the snack aisle at a grocery store. The snack aisle at a grocery store, the definition of that aisle, let's say it's aisle 3, is snacks. And maybe the definition to the manager means, take home, snacks that are sort of 1 to 2 per person, sort of take home, ready to eat snacks. In a ready to eat snack aisle, you can have banana chips, you might have cut up apple slices, you also might have Doritos and Oreos. It doesn't mean that Doritos and Oreos are the same thing as the cut up apple slices. It means that they both fall under this criteria, sort of arbitrary criteria, but it's a criteria that someone made up. This isn't like natural law, but somebody made up criteria based hopefully on science. And in this case, for the grocery store manager, maybe based on something related to, the science of how people shop. And that's how they did that. And so when heroin and marijuana are currently in Schedule 1, it doesn't mean that the government thinks that marijuana is as dangerous as heroin. It doesn't mean it thinks marijuana is as dangerous as LSD or whatever it is. It means that they fall under the criteria. And the Schedule 1 criteria means it's a drug that has no accepted medical use and a high rate of abuse. Now, traditionally, the accepted medical use would mean that it doesn't have an approved medical use. And that's a really key distinction that was never a real distinction before. But FDA in this latest scheduling recommendation, they've made the distinction between accepted and approved. And I'll get more into that later, but that's a really interesting distinction that's never been made before. Schedule 2 substances are plenty dangerous, but they might have some accepted medical use. So if you have any accepted medical use, you cannot be in Schedule 1. You have to be in 2 or lower, right? And so fentanyl patches have been used in hospitals for decades. It doesn't mean that we think that fentanyl is somehow less dangerous than marijuana. It means that fentanyl is Schedule 2 because it has some accepted medical use. Still has a high rate of abuse, so it should be Schedule 2. And then so on and so forth in terms of as you go down. But if you have no accepted medical use, you have to be in Schedule 1. All right. And so you think about some other drugs, for example, in Schedule 2. And for those that raise hands, I think we'll do questions at the end, and then we'll just leave the panelists open here to chime in. But for Schedule 2 drugs, you have drugs like, Adderall, methadone, fentanyl. But you also have things like poppy straw, opium straw. Now, what would poppy straw be used for? Why is that Schedule 2? Well, that's Schedule 2 because the concentrate from poppy straw is used in opiates that we use for medical purposes. So actually, poppy straw is, even though it's itself not necessarily a drug that you can go buy and get poppy straw from a CVS pharmacy, but its concentrate is what you use. So its pure form is what's medical. So it has to be Schedule 2. But again, this is really the key point about scheduling that's very important. And then you go down the list, of course, with Schedule 4 and 5. And then, of course, you have uncontrolled substances. I mean, Congress did not write in alcohol or tobacco in the Controlled Substances Act. Now, you may say, well, why didn't they? Well, because culturally, we made a decision after Prohibition really to leave most of alcohol regulation to states and, to have some federal oversight, but frankly, very little. And tobacco now is by special statute is controlled by FDA, but that's fairly recently. Before it wasn't. That doesn't mean, again, that we think that the macro effect of alcohol is somehow less dangerous than the macro effect of a Schedule 5 drug. Of course not. But that's just the legal decision and definition that's been made. So alcohol and tobacco are not included in the CSA. The scheduling of marijuana. Now, marijuana has long been in Schedule 1. It's only ever been in Schedule 1. It's not uncommon over the last 30 years. We've seen many challenges to that scheduling, okay? This was actually a fairly good, I got to hand it to them, PR mechanism. In the beginning, it was by NORML. NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, was once the most prominent marijuana organization in the country. It's a shell of what it once was. It's completely, interestingly, as legalization has increased in popularity, these organizations have totally been diluted by the industry. So they're very much less relevant than they used to. But they used to be quite relevant. In the 70s, multiple times they challenged this. And it got them headlines, it got them in the news, it made the government review this over and over again. It was a tactic they used. to do this through this bureaucratic act of Congress, which is the second bullet there. They couldn't do it through Congress, so they had to do it through the administrative process here. Anyway, the last time this was looked at, other than the time that we're looking at it now, was when President Obama, a group of medical marijuana advocates petitioned the DEA to look at it again. And so President Obama's administration looked at it. Chuck Rosenberg actually was the acting administrator for DEA. And they did a very thorough review and of course, once again, found it doesn't have accepted medical use and it has a high abuse potential. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be in Schedule 1. Now, again, Congress can change these schedules anytime. We've actually advocated for a reform of the schedules because we do think that there are some things where you could add a research schedule to increase the research. I'm going to talk a little bit more about increasing research in a minute, but there are a lot of things that Congress could do if they wanted to change a Controlled Substances Act. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on anything I've said so far, or we should keep going.
Keep going.
So in October of 2022, President Biden, let's just back up. He promised on the campaign that he wanted to reschedule marijuana to Schedule 2. We talked about that. Kind of seen as a compromise between full legalization and doing nothing. Okay. So after some other pardons and other actions, in October of 2022, the president initiated the process. And by the way, anybody could initiate the process. But this time it happened to be the president that initiated it. Okay. So people will listen probably. It'll be done faster probably, right? Which, by the way, it's been much faster this time than it ever has been. So clearly being president certainly counts for something in this. He initiated this process, as administration did, which meant that the HHS first had to do a review of the marijuana schedule. And they did a review. And interestingly enough, on August 30th at 4:20 p.m., which was probably not a coincidence, the Department of Health and Human Services said that they have transmitted their recommendation to DEA because first HHS has to look at it, then DEA has to look at it. And I will tell you, as somebody who's served in 3 different White House administrations, the public announcement of this was really surprising. I couldn't believe it, to be honest. And I knew from then on, I was sort of holding faith that there would be a normal process and there wouldn't be anything different. But I knew from the minute at 4:20 p.m. on August 30th, 2023, that this was an unusual process that was about to be unfolding. And boy, was I right. And was so many other people right. Because to publicly announce that is a very weird thing. Also, to not share your recommendation, but publicly announce that you have a recommendation is a very weird thing. And so I knew that the government processes for this, they were not the normal processes. I probably got a hint about that when I found out that the FDA brought in a lot of new people to do the review. That process has been very much behind closed doors, but from what we can decipher and put the puzzle pieces together, it was interesting that you had new people, including somebody who was the marijuana czar for 2 states, who just was all of a sudden recruited by FDA. So there were definitely changes. Things didn't smell the same way as they did before. So that was done. And basically 4 months, they finally had to release an unredacted version of this recommendation. And that was actually done by a sort of somewhat pro-cannabis lawyer who said, wait a minute. And he was right. I mean, we were totally in agreement. How can you announce this, not even tell us what you're doing, and yet you're announcing it on Twitter? Like, what you're announcing something on Twitter, but not the whole picture. So he actually sued HHS, and before that lawsuit could go forward, it would have taken too long. They basically relented and said, okay, yeah, we probably botched this. Go ahead. Here's our version. Here's what it is. So it was a 252-page review. Now we've gone through this review. If you're interested in our take of why FDA went there, you can scan to review the full rationale. But I really couldn't believe what an exercise in cherry picking this recommendation was. If this was a dissertation, a PhD dissertation, it would have failed at first blush. It was incredible how this was basically fitting a square peg in a round hole. And I'm not necessarily blaming FDA, because I think they were put in there for, there were obviously political reasons. I mean, this was a campaign promise after all. So they had to figure this out. They were under pressure from legalizers to deschedule it completely. Like they said, wow, we don't want it to be in there at all. They were under pressure by a lot of people. But the reality is, they basically said in 252 pages, one of the key points is that because marijuana is popular, it's accepted. And so that means it has acceptable use. Now, there's a little footnote in there that says, we're not saying it's approved. Don't think that you can't get a prescription. Don't think that it's approved, but we're saying it's accepted. And so for the first time ever that I understand, you have a drug that has accepted but not approved medical use that's out of Schedule 1. It's unprecedented. They also the way they did the review in terms of the test that they used was a test that they've never used. It was a completely new test, a new 2-part test that they've never used. So there were a lot of irregularities here. Now, what does this mean if it is happening? Well, it wouldn't legalize marijuana. It would not allow the prescription for marijuana because there's no approved medical use. Frankly, the industry is kind of split. I mean, part of them, they welcome this because they're going to be not subject to taxes as much. They're going to be able to deduct business expenses like advertising expenses. But in reality, some of them say, well, wait a minute, does that mean we have more FDA oversight? What does this actually mean? Nobody knows what it means. I mean, you have no idea. I mean, I can't imagine FDA is going to all of a sudden exercise their administrative power that they haven't done, ever on this issue, and go and, force pot shops in Denver to comply with Schedule 3 requirements. But God knows it's very actually unknown what would happen if this actually went through. Now, a lot of people and a lot of very well-meaning people and well-meaning organizations say, Kevin, regardless of, the headlines we're going to get that are going to confuse people completely about what this does, regardless of the tax, maybe this is good because we can do more research. And maybe there's just such a difference that we can do more research and it'll be easier to look at. And so it's true that research would probably be a little bit easier, but that's kind of like saying, my car, is going to be, a lot safer because, I changed one of my windshield wipers. Now, it might be safer, like one of them might be bad, and so you made it. But if there are a lot of other problems with your car, the windshield wiper, especially if you live in California, aren't going to be that relevant. And what I'm getting at here is that funding is the number one reason why there's research into any drug. And I'm not sure moving it to Schedule 3 is going to all of a sudden the clouds are going to part and the investment's going to fly from the sky in terms of a true pharmaceutical drug for many reasons, one of which is, why would you go to the pains of doing that when 40 states have just gone around the FDA process and created their own drug themselves? But anyhow, we've made a grid. We have not publicly released this because we still actually have some people at DEA looking at it. But basically, what's the difference between marijuana as a Schedule 1 and marijuana as a Schedule 3? The big difference is that the criminal penalties are generally unchanged, right? So, people, the way this has been touted by the White House is that all of a sudden we're going to have, we have a failed approach to marijuana is what I've heard, or, because of the criminal penalties, and this is going to help people not go to jail. The criminal penalties are basically unchanged because marijuana is by statute in the Controlled Substances Act. Now, there are some trafficking penalties that are like minor differences, not major ones, depending on how you read the statute. But bottom line is, marijuana is in the statute, not as a Schedule 1 drug, but as marijuana. And so there's a very good argument to be made that none of these criminal penalties are going to change. Secondly, these are federal penalties. So, I mean, most of the penalties have been done on the state level, unless you're talking about the biggest drug cartels, which are, by the way, they're always charged with another drug anyway, and it's certainly not for personal use. So this idea that people won't be in prison and we need to change our failed approach, it doesn't actually do that at all. And that's probably my biggest pet peeve with this, is that it's being touted as we'll have fewer penalties. That's not what scheduling does at all. So really, that's a key point. Business taxes will be deductible under Schedule 3. Not a good thing in my mind, a great thing in the industry mind, of course. It does not allow a state for legalize the drug. It is not eligible for a prescription because it's not an approved product. What about the research requirements? Well, you may not have to submit your research protocol to DEA immediately, but you're still probably subject to IRB approval. You still need documentation. You still have to keep inventory records. You are, even if it's a Schedule 1 drug, you can distribute drugs to other authorized individuals. So that doesn't change. The DEA has to still be notified if you lose your drugs. You still have to maintain accurate records. You still have to maintain inventory. You have to do it in a different way than you would normally. But a lot of this stuff is technical. You still need to store your product in a securely locked, substantially constructed cabinet. I mean, this is how detailed we're going into. You don't need a statement of it, but you still need to do it. So you need a lot of, there's a lot of things that actually don't even change when it comes to research requirements. And yet, I think people have been duped into thinking that overnight, the research is just going to fall from the sky because it's so much easier. Is it somewhat easier? Yeah, you can argue it's somewhat easier. That's good. But, you don't need to total your car if just the windshield wiper is broken. Like, there are ways to fix this without completely changing what's happening and allowing industry to really invest in this more. And again, that's the medical side and research side. There's other slides we have on, but I do want to let the other panelists in here on, why this is actually a drug that they use the word abuse, so that's their word in the statute, but why you could argue that it's actually also one of the most highly abused drugs. It's actually the most commonly abused drugs for young people. It's not like one of the most common, it's the most common, right? 1 in 3 users have a use disorder. There's so many stats and so many things we can go with. When you look at the rates of substance use disorder in the United States across all age groups, alcohol, it's not scheduled for better or worse, so that doesn't matter on that front. But I mean, when you look at marijuana, I mean, the idea that it's somehow less of a macro effect in the United States doesn't really make sense. So where are we now? Well, there's now a proposed rule. They initiated this. There's what they call a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM, that they've published on May 21st. And so this is now open for public comment. You have until July 22nd. You can only do it once. After that comment period ends, and by the way, if you want to know how to do it, we'll be sending out an email about it. We've already done that, and we can talk about that. After the comment ends, the administration will analyze it, develop a final rule, and then, of course, that can be challenged as well. So we're still, kind of, the process is far from over. Let's put now. They could speed the process up. They could say, we're done on July 22nd, and on July 25th, we're going to publish the final rule, and we're not going to allow any hearings on this. Goodbye, thank you. They could do that. The idea that there wouldn't be a hearing, of course, this whole process has been completely irregular from the start. So I'm out of the business of predicting anything about it anymore. So who knows? I would think they would grant a hearing, but we don't know. So we do encourage you to include your comments. We provided comments as well. Obviously, the industry and the legalizers have done so as well. They have a form letter. A lot of the pro-legalization groups don't like rescheduling, because they want to see descheduling. They want it out of the Controlled Substances Act. They want to treat it like tobacco or alcohol, meaning it does not have those regulations. So that's something to remember. You can submit your comments there.
Go back to that previous slide real quick. So one thing that's important to note is that the Drug Enforcement Administration, in their Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, did something that is highly unusual, that indicated that DEA is really not on board with this rescheduling process. It's clearly a big debate right now at the administration. So what they did was, for each of the sections of this NPRM, they specifically asked for more data and more writing on the concerns related to this change. So what they asked for was more information and data and feedback on marijuana's potency, on marijuana's addictive potential, on the impact of the illicit market, diversion, on the harms that people who have a cannabis use disorder are experiencing, what those symptoms are like. They're asking for those things in the NPRM. So it's almost like they're giving a roadmap for how to rebut their own proposed rule which, you know, there's a lot of political and a lot of thought around
Mm-hmm.
why that would be. But it's important you understand that the DEA is asking for this information. And so we've had a few questions already about, you know, high potency marijuana, protecting youth. Those are all things that you should be including in your public comment. You can scan this, you know, to go to our page. We give you the feedback. CADCA also has an amazing write-up of comment as well. You can go to their website and check that out too. But when you submit public comment, it's important to understand you only get one shot at it. Once you submit it, you can't submit again. You can't redo it. So be thoughtful about how you're doing it. You know, put everything that you want to cover in there. And what I would say is, you know, obviously we and CADCA have both provided form letters for you to use with a lot of the data already there. That's great, but the most effective thing to do would be to include your personal touch to this. So whether you have a story, whether you have other data that are not in there. So think of our form letters as just something to help you get started, or at least give you things to think about. But don't hesitate to remove those things and put your own information in, because it's good. They're going to be looking for unique feedback that's useful, and they are required by law by federal law to look at all the comments. So there's 10,000 plus public comments already submitted. I don't know how they're going to go through that, but they are required to consider these comments. So really, really important that you do that, and really important to understand DEA wants the information on potency, addiction, on the harms of the abuse potential. So really, you know, those are some key areas to look at.
Yeah. Great. I don't know if we need to go through all of this, sort of why Schedule 3, and I talked about a lot of this. The analysis was different. They moved away from their normal test. There's some legal issues there. I mean, one of the issues is that we're subject to international conventions against drugs, which many people think that means we have to put, including the federal court, thinks that we have to put marijuana in Schedule 1 or 2 to be in compliance. You know, there are a lot of issues there, but you know, they totally changed the criteria. I mean, the studies that they use to support medical use are a few very bad studies, basically, literally a few very bad studies. The standard has been totally changed, as I mentioned, and so it's basically just saying that if it's a popular, then it's approved, and then it's accepted, I should say. And so if it's accepted, it doesn't need to be approved. I mean, we've never heard of something like this before. It basically means, I mean, look, if you're in the drug business, you should forget about the FDA process. You should absolutely just go to the ballot initiative process. And then all of a sudden, if you get 50% plus one, all of a sudden you should be considered approved. You should be off Schedule 1. I mean, if I was an LSD, that's what I would be doing right now, which, by the way, they are doing right now. There's multiple states voting on that. So it's very smart. I mean, that's the kind of thing that they are creating, which is really pretty amazing. When they looked at abuse potential, they basically did a cherry pick list of other drugs and said that marijuana is not as harmful as these, so therefore it can't be Schedule 1. Again, this is something that, you know, you could imagine, you know, a legalizer in their basement doing, you know, in 1978, based on the research from that. I mean, this is not 2024. This is not how it's done. This is not what it is. So there are a lot of things we can do, even if the administration agrees that after the notice of proposed rulemaking, there are legal challenges, the Congressional Review Act. We're looking at all of that right now, rest assured. And we're going to be maximizing this because we think Schedule 3 is really a bad idea. And there are a lot of challenges that we are looking at. I don't necessarily need to get into details of all of that. So I do want to see what Sue and Russ have to add, their thoughts on this, and then we'll kind of go through. We have a bunch of Q&A, which we can all go through as well. But Sue, did you want to add anything there?
I did. I wasn't sure how many people saw the American Trucking Association's letter. They are extraordinarily concerned because this basically takes it out of being a safety sensitive thing. And they could definitely be liable if their truck drivers end up smoking marijuana. They wouldn't necessarily be needed to be tested anymore, get in a big crash, and, you know, gigantic liability issues, gigantic issues with traffic safety, airline pilots, and other safety sensitive jobs. Schedule 3, you don't have to be tested for those. Anyway, so interesting that there's some unlikely allies in this that are very concerned and that have made their thoughts known. And I'll stop there and let Russ have his chance to say something.
All right, thank you, Sue. Right, so number one, I wanted to talk about the difference between cannabis and cannabinoid medicines, because what this rescheduling does, they specifically talk about marijuana, meaning botanical cannabis. And now that's not a medicine. We do have cannabinoid medicines. There's 4 that are in circulation that have been approved either in the United States or in Europe. So that in small defined doses, THC and CBD and a combination of THC and CBD are all approved medications. So these substances in small, well-defined, regulated doses are medicinal. The problem is that giving, botanical cannabis, I'll just say weed. I say like George Carlin, weed is 1 syllable. Botanical cannabis is about 9. But it's weed. Weed is not medicine. It's from batch to batch. It's different. There's all sorts of different chemicals, different percentages. Even if it's tested, when it's tested in so-called medical dispensaries from one batch to another, one day to another, it's all different. And that's not how medicine is prescribed. Medications have to be prescribed very carefully on a milligram per milligram basis, and you want to have a reproducible substance. So when you go back for your second prescription, it's the same stuff that's in your first prescription. The other thing is in the definition, as Kevin was talking about, how they tried to fit the square peg in the round hole, or as I learned from lawyers that their whole analysis was pretextual, right? This is a pretext for legalizing, scheduling botanical cannabis, because they changed the definition of what currently accepted medical use is. Currently accepted medical use used to mean FDA approved or similar, having the same criteria. Instead, what HHS came up with, as Kevin said, if it's popular, they're doing it, everyone else is jumping off the Empire State Building, we're going to jump off the Empire State Building. But it's, even under their definition, they fail, because it's not widespread. They said that this is HHS's own justification, that 30,000 providers across the United States are certified to recommend marijuana. And that may sound impressive until you consider there are over 1 million physicians, and that doesn't even include the other providers who are allowed to authorize use, such as physician assistants, nurse practitioners, dentists, podiatrists, veterinarians, and other people. So if you do the math, those who are authorized to recommend marijuana, it amounts to 0.3% of the providers. So that's not widespread. That is a small minority. In Colorado, they keep good statistics on who is writing certifications and how many certifications they write. And if you look at their numbers, you find that the top 1/10 of 1%, it's only 1/10 of 1% of providers are writing the vast majority, about 75% of the recommendations. So again, it's not widespread. One other thing I'll mention, since I'm really a primary care provider.
And Dr. Kamer, that's a fantastic point. I'm hoping you guys put that in your public comment. I'm assuming you did.
Yes, thanks, Lou.
Very good. And any other doctors out there, please feel free to bring up that point again. That's an excellent point.
Right, and that, that's one good thing. Since Colorado was an early state, they did put that into their laws that they have to compile these things. So, as far as doctors out there, and I'm really a primary care doctor. I've done all these other things. I could still consider those sidelines because basically I'm an internist. And in my practice, like this morning, for example, this is the problem when marijuana, sort of indiscriminate, raw, crude cannabis preparations are now considered medicine. As I have people coming in, like a 74-year-old woman this morning said that her friend in Florida sent her some gummies, and one's 10 milligrams and one's 25 milligrams, if that's really the dose, and that she starts taking them every so often at night. Now, she's a little confused to start with, maybe she was a little more confused, but we have no idea. I have no idea what that is really doing to her. But people are now convinced this is, it's almost like this is the holy water that they have to have. Everyone has to have a gummy every night as their nighttime ritual. And it's, yeah, anyway, thank you very much. Any other questions?
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kamer. We do have a ton of questions, and a lot of them are really good questions. So I'm going to package a few of the ones we've gotten together. There's a general question that's come from a few different folks about, is Schedule 3 really where it should go? What about Schedule 2? Is anyone even thinking about Schedule 2 in this process? So yeah, Kevin, I don't know if you want to lead off the answer.
Well, I mean, yeah, DEA could turn around and say, actually, now we're gonna actually say it should be Schedule 2. So they could change it. What does that mean? Again, it means it still has some accepted medical use. So, they could, I mean, again, anything is possible. They could do this as a compromise. They could do that. But we really don't know.
That's good. Another question was, what would the overall public safety impact be of rescheduling it to 3? Sue, I don't know if you have an answer you want to add to that one.
Well, obviously, the whole safety sensitive job thing is a tremendous problem. But if it was in Schedule 2, you would still be under those rules and regulations. So, car accidents, we've seen poison control data go off the charts, especially among young kids who are accessing this through their parents, having gummies, lollipops, cookies, all kinds of stuff, regular drug driving. And the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is just daily use, especially among kids. It's really way up. And as far as the research, I think we all agree, yeah, we need a lot more research on high potency marijuana and what it does, not only to the adolescent brain, but, also to a number of other factors. So I think we definitely need that, but yeah, no, car accidents, ER visits, all of that goes up as the use of a drug goes up. And I just want to say too, as you saw, Kevin showed it, people are like, alcohol is so much more dangerous than marijuana. It's just so many more people use it. If we get to an even playing field, and we're starting to almost get there between the use of these two substances, you're going to see many, many more issues with public safety and medical problems related to marijuana, because it has to do with the number of people that use it. And then of those number, some large percentage can get into trouble with it. I don't know if Kevin, if you want to add to.
Yeah, well, what I would say is, I think with more money from the tax write-off for all of their business expenses, we can expect a lot more availability and a lot more advertising and a lot more accessibility. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Kamer.
Right. So I was going to say 2 things that follow up on what Sue said with the use of marijuana going up to and reaching and exceeding the use of alcohol. I mean, we've finally gotten to a stage now where the daily or near daily use of marijuana has equaled the daily or near daily use of alcohol. When I walked to work around the corner in a suburb of New York, not even in New York City, but in a suburb, I smell weed at 8 a.m. And I don't see people with bottles of alcohol at 8 a.m. And this is part of this myth of medicine that it's okay, it's healthy. I mean, when people tell me why they use marijuana, what if they're using marijuana, 20, 30 years ago, they would say they were at a concert, they were at a party, and it's a friend. Now it's, I use it because I have a pain and I don't want to take opioids, or I have anxiety. Maybe no one goes to parties or concerts anymore, but this has become the myth of it's a great excuse. It's a great excuse for people to say it's my medicine. And people, look, patients have told me over the years, sometimes they say, alcohol, they have their drinks, that's their medicine. People have said there are other drugs, other illicit drugs are their medicine. And the other thing that Sue was talking about with the point that as Schedule 3 drug, that THC would come off of the DOT testing panel, is that impairment from THC is very tricky. It's tricky in measuring if someone's impaired. It's not as easy as with alcohol. But for reasons that are the opposite of what, and I'm glad we have a lot of participants, because what is never said is that you can be impaired from marijuana and your blood level of THC will be undetectable, right? In the occasional user of marijuana, the impairment, and this has been shown over and over, clearly shown that the impairment can last for hours after use, and the THC blood level goes under the limit can be under 2 hours. So the only way to really guarantee safety would be by the urine test or other type of testing that shows use for a longer time period. To err on the side of safety, we're talking about we're talking about airplane pilots, railroad engineers, interstate tractor trailer drivers, and school bus drivers, which is my favorite.
Very good. Thank you. We have a question about what is the average number of arrests for marijuana possession at the federal level over the past decade? Kevin, you want to take that one?
Oh, good. Yeah, well, no, I love these questions. So actually, there is a very good report by the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which we can send out, but I do want to show 2 graphs about federal marijuana arrests and charging, and they may surprise you. Really interesting here. So let me actually get to this. All right, so first of all, the arrest numbers are basically mimic in some ways these sentencings. When you're arrested on the federal level for marijuana, it's usually about public lands or something to do with the border. Now, this is what's interesting. This is federal marijuana possession sentencings for the last 13 years. And it was very low, what you'll see. There was a big bump in Arizona. That is the district that drives most of the arrests and sentencing. By the way, this is numbered. This is only, it's individuals. It's not like in the thousands. This is individuals. So essentially, as you can see, in the last couple of years, in every federal district in the country, in 2021, there was 145 sentencings, which, by the way, had an average sentence of either no prison or a maximum of 4 months in prison. And these are federal possession, which usually means they've fled down from trafficking. Something happened between 2012 and 2016, 15, where there was a huge increase by the border in Arizona. There's probably a reason for that. Really, really interesting. So basically, this is not about federal arrest or federal possession issue at all. And I just I want folks to just realize this is a little bit out of our scope here, but this was another graph I looked at, the drug cases as a share of federal sentencing. Please look at the number of simple possession. This is all drugs, by the way, not marijuana. Simple possession, you can barely see the blue. I was like squinting to see what color it is. It's barely there in FY21. Drug trafficking is the vast majority of drugs. And guess what? Non-drug crimes are the vast majority of cases as a share of the federal sentencing caseload. So this idea that people are in prison for even drug possession, let alone marijuana on the federal level. Now, state level is different. State level is about 25%. It's more. But from the federal level, it's not even registering. Trafficking registers because these are federal issues. So again, it's even the pardoning and expunging or that the president did a couple of years ago, it did not release one person out of prison. So I don't want to stray away from scheduling, but I do think I'm glad, Andrew, you asked that question. I think that was a good point. There are some other questions about what will happen with Schedule 3. What will it look like? We have no idea. So boards of pharmacy would normally control the dispensing of these drugs. I can't imagine that the FDA is going to say to all the pot shops out there, you have to go to the boards of pharmacy. And the boards of pharmacy would look at them like they're crazy. There's no dosage. There's no specificity to these drugs. There's no batch to batch consistency. I mean, that's why, again, it's square peg in a round hole. So we we really have no idea. Somebody asked a question about, what I thought states already did this. States already had legal medical marijuana. Yes, they do, but they're legal on the state level, not the federal level, because they went around what makes something approved medical use by doing ballot initiatives. So with the ballot initiatives, they deemed marijuana a medicine. They didn't go through the normal process. There's also been some questions about, like, will rescheduling help us put regulations on advertising, etc.? No, it has nothing to do with that. It won't. There's no way. Again, you would have to have a separate statute that would do that, and so you can't. Now you can do it on the state level. I urge everybody on the state level. Some people think at SAM we sort of, at least us, it's kind of like, we're not interested in working in states that have legalized because we're moving on. But actually, we work very hard to place regulations in these states. The problem is the industry really over supersedes it.
One other thing I'll just add, just on this subject of what happens with Schedule 3. Schedule 3, as it is supposed to function, will mean that marijuana remains illegal as it currently exists in all these states that have voted to legalize it, whether for medical or recreational. So I think the first thing people should do if this ends up being, what happens and then marijuana becomes Schedule 3, is asking the Biden administration and DOJ to enforce this change, to enforce Schedule 3, which would mean the entire industry should be shut down. That's literally what Schedule 3 means. So I think, in terms of how it's supposed to look, is marijuana remains illegal. Now, if there is an approved medication that the FDA approves as a medication, then the way, again, this is supposed to work is if there's a FDA-approved marijuana product, then that would have more accessibility to the public because of that Schedule 3 status. That's the only way it would change. So now, that's not to say that, the FDA isn't planning on doing some entirely new regulatory regime where they say, okay, we're going to treat marijuana different than every other Schedule 3 substance ever. And we're going to say that, these company-owned pot shops out there, their products are okay under Schedule 3. They would probably have to take a number of years to promulgate something like that. But that's really the only thing I could see that would actually lead to any kind of really substantive regulatory change. So, the way Schedule 3 is supposed to work, it should preclude any kind of additional, regulations or accessibility.
Right. So I have a question. Which you started to answer. What happens to all of these so-called dispensaries and the recreational shops that are open if we really want to enforce that cannabis is Schedule 3? And when I prescribe Schedule 3 drugs, I have to go onto the state registry site, search through all their prescriptions. I have to send an electronic prescription. I need to specify an exact dosage, an exact number of milligrams, and each month I'm responsible for evaluating that. There's very strict regulation now. So obviously they must mean they're going to close everything down and open up other stores. Is that what's going to happen?
Basically, what would happen is the FDA could say one of two things. They could say, well, first of all, they would say you all have to shut down. You're out of compliance with the protocol for a Schedule 3. Second, they could say submit all your products for clinical trials and put them all through this process. I think that's highly unlikely, but they could say that if they're going to treat them with consistency. So regardless, the industry does not want the practical full. If Schedule 3 were fully enforced, the industry would not be happy at all. They would be erased overnight. I think that's essentially what they would be looking at. And the people who would enforce that, it would start with the FDA, but I think DOJ would have to also be involved in some way. So we got a bunch of other questions.
A lot of the questions are like, what would happen if? The answer is we don't know. We've never been in this situation before. One thing we know is that they'll get a tax break. The other thing we know is that they'll get a headline that says government downgrades marijuana. And so there goes your perception of harm among young people, right? And among others. So those two things will definitely happen. What else happens? We really don't know. Someone asked about the legal implications. There really aren't. There shouldn't be legal implications because there's no criminal justice implications. But again, we don't know what the government might say. Well, we're also going to do this and this and this. they've never done what they've done so far. They've never done before, right? So it's really, really unknown.
Kevin, can I ask you to
Please.
respond to a question? So
Please.
in most of the states that started with medical marijuana, it really was about legalizing. So the minute that they got medical, they sort of moved to a ballot initiative for legalization. We all know that there's a number of bills at the federal level, one of which Schumer is committed to bring to the Senate floor. So how likely is this just the same sort of a tactic, like take it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and then, wait for Congress to decide that they're going to remove it from the schedules?
Yeah, I mean, definitely one way to look at this is to say that, this is kind of a stepping stone, and it's going to give Congress, sort of the oomph they need to say, you know what, Schedule 3, actually, it is confusing, and it didn't legalize it. We thought it would. So you know what? Now we should just pass full legalization. Like, that's definitely possible. The other thing that's possible, by the way, is that the members of Congress who are a little bit ambivalent on federal legalization, they don't mind states' rights, but they're not like fully on board with it. They don't want to make this a primary issue that they deal with. They could say, and I think the president is probably using this rationale, which is to say that it's like, well, we did rescheduling. That's our compromise. And I don't want to hear about it anymore. I don't want to talk about this anymore. And I want to move on. So it's true that the advocates will use this for sure, like they did with medical marijuana, as you said, as a way to push it to legalization. I think absolutely. But I think the people actually in power that are changing laws and have the ability to do that, I think many of them could actually look at this in a very different way, in a way that's more about, well, maybe this was the compromise. And, I'm convinced that that's what happened at the White House, is that basically the pollsters and the 23-year-old assistants in the West Wing urged the president to legalize marijuana as a campaign issue. And the president is not in favor of legalization. Lord knows the issues with addiction in his family that we're seeing every day, sadly, that are heartbreaking. And I think President Biden probably said, I don't want to do that. And they said, all right, well, plan B, let's reschedule it and have people kind of think that we're legalizing it. That way we get the public polling benefit from it. I think that's what the rationale. By the way, the public polling, young people don't see this as a top issue. I think that's a miscalculation to imagine that this is going to get people to vote for you who normally wouldn't vote for you. This is going to somehow convince the 20-year-old Trump voter to vote for you now. I'm not sure. But, that was part of the logic.
We have questions about hearings in Congress. And so, back to the process, there is, during this public comment period, anybody can petition for an administrative hearing. We will be doing that. I believe IASIC has already done it. CADCA may have already done it, or hopefully will be doing it. And others should do it also. And basically what this is for people who, for decisions with scheduling that are controversial. A judge will be appointed. People will be able to argue this in front of the judge. There will be testimony. This has already happened with a recent psychedelics hearing related to psychedelic scheduling. So we are hopeful that will happen for marijuana, that the DEA will grant that. So that's something we're working on. Congress, these committees and subcommittees can hold hearings on anything they want. So, you might see this in Congress as well. There are certainly members who have talked about it, but where we really want to see it happen is with the administrative hearing process within the DEA as a part of this NPRM, because that gives us a chance to more fully vet this out, bring experts and things like that. So that's top of mind for all of us right now.
Yeah. The question was about, we had a bunch of questions on Schedule 2, like why not just go for that? The issue is that I'm not thinking about the abuse. You could make an argument and say, well, abuse potential, LSD, frankly, you can make that argument about abuse potential, but that aside, heroin, has more of abuse potential than marijuana. Yes, it does. But does that mean it should go to Schedule 2? Well, the other part of Schedule 2 is accepted medical use. So I don't think there's a rationale for Schedule 2 because there's no accepted medical use. So you have to meet both of those criteria, not just one of them, to be rescheduled. Somebody asked about why not just go for.
And Kevin, it goes back to what Dr. Kramer said. It's no accepted medical use for botanical weed. Okay, we're not saying there's absolutely no accepted medical use for components of marijuana that are FDA approved and have gone through the process.
Yeah,
That
absolutely. There are also a bunch of questions on testing. What will happen to testing? This is one of the areas of uncertainty. What will happen to private testing? I think you can still privately test. I don't know if that, but I mean, but then there's also issues of, can you prevent employment? I mean, it's a web of new issues that we don't know the answer to, unfortunately. I wish we had clear-cut answers. List of groups opposed to rescheduling. We are putting that together. Let me put the rescheduling resource page we have, which would probably answer a lot of the questions. I'm going to put it here in the chat that we have. That's where we'll put that list. But there are there's a lot there that that we can deal with.
I think we just have a couple left with the webinar. So Kevin, I don't know if there's
college campuses. Yeah, we're going to, we don't know what, I mean, I think what it means is that college students will think that marijuana is even more harmless than they already do. I mean, you know, in terms of, you know, drug-free housing and things, there might be some implications for that if drug-free housing is Schedule 1 or 2 drugs. So that's something to think about, because they'll say, well, it has accepted medical use now. So that's definitely, we do not have a test for impaired driving for marijuana. So that is a key issue that was asked about. Do we have a 0.08? We do not.
We also about administrative hearings like through Congress. Now, Dave, I think what you're referring to is the Congressional Review Act. So yeah, Congress has a right to you know, step in and decide the scheduling status of a drug. I mean, they can do basically anything with their legislative powers. The problem is that, you know, Congress is divided. It's, you know, very narrow majorities. So it's very unlikely that Congress will have the willpower to do anything substantive. They could likely hold hearings, but they wouldn't be able to actually exercise their authority here unless, you know, there was a huge sea change in terms of how both sides looked at this.
Well, another question is about vapes. Is there a connection? I mean, yeah, you can imagine a vaping company say that they actually, this is a medical product, even though it's not approved, it's accepted, and it should be treated like a Schedule 3 drug, not an illegal one. So again, a lot of uncertainty, but this certainly opens the door for the industry to do things like that. Any other question? I mean, there's a lot of questions we keep getting in, and clearly this could be, you know, this could be something that we have a much longer
this could be
discussion
very long.
for.
But what I will say is we are here to help. Yeah. So, you know, email us with your questions if you want us to give any advice. You know, Sue is here, Dr. Kamer is here. Their organizations are here to support you as well. But reach out to us. We're happy to give further input. If you have more, you know, private or just direct questions about public comment or things that could be done, we're happy to talk to you. All of us on this Zoom are happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, we are considering all legal options. Obviously, we're not going to reveal the whole legal strategy here in public, but we're definitely considering all those options as well. There was a question about that and about the process. If DEA doesn't grant a hearing, can Congress? Yes, they can, and obviously we'll be, you know, pushing for that. You know, other people ask, how realistic is the public comment involvement to change it? I mean, look. Even if we do our best efforts, I think that because the legalization groups they've done so well in organizing people and frankly in changing public opinion and in you know, deceiving people into thinking their product is good. This isn't about, you know, who has more comments, but we do want the more comments, the better. I would say it's necessary, but not, you know, it's sufficient in changing this, but it's definitely something that we want to see happen. So that's why we urge you for. We urge you to do this. If we were, yeah, Luke's right. If we didn't answer your questions, please email us info@learnaboutsam.org. Please keep in mind our summit, which will be happening at the tail end of the CADCA conference next February in National Harbor. And any final thoughts, Russ, Sue, Luke?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I think that our whole country's gone anti-science, and to me, it's shame on the FDA. People already don't really trust FDA or the scientific process. And for them to do this, I think actually even calls people like me into question who really did rely on them.
Great point, Sue. And, one thing Kevin and I had a meeting with the FDA, I'll just leave it at that, and folks who were involved with some of this process, and they, wanted to hear what we thought. And so I shared with them, I said, I think you need to tell America what the definition of the word medicine is, because we've had a century-long understanding of what medicine was, and that's been completely thrown out the window with what is being proposed. So there's still a chance for them to pull this back. This rule, I think we all saw in the process, they could withdraw this rule at the end of this notice of proposed rulemaking process. So hopefully they'll do that, because right now what they're proposing would mean that you could use this as precedent to say a whole laundry list of very, very bad substances could also be called medicine too. So,
and again, it doesn't mean that we're anti-research or anti-reform. In fact, there are really much better ways to increase the research that we could be talking about now. That's what DEA should be focusing on. How do you reform some of the research requirements? How does Congress look at
Congress just passed a huge research bill for marijuana that's going to blow the doors open on research happening in marijuana that we helped author. Everyone on this call supported it. And that just passed last Congress. They haven't even been given a chance to roll that out, which it expands marijuana growers.
They should be
research that could be done.
Right.
And that
they should be funding that.
Yeah.
No, they should be funding that. But unfortunately, this is an election year, and that's what's unfortunate about it. That's what we're dealing with. But yeah, no, we are going to remain focused on trying to increase the research. Of course, we don't want bad laws on the books, but we also don't need even more reduced perception of harm, which I think we're going to get with this, if it happens. So, great. I think we're done. We appreciate everybody's coming on. This was wonderful, and we hope to see you in person soon and on another webinar. Thank you
all. Have a great week.
Thank you all. Thanks.